Thinking Basketball Podcast. My name is Ben. Welcome to an emergency Thinking Basketball Podcast. So many things are happening in the playoffs right now that I had to wrangle up. Thinking Basketball's own, the legend himself, Mike De La Rosa. He's going to come in a second. We're going to talk about a number of the series. We're going to get into some of the X's and O's, the trends, the things everyone loves about the playoffs, the ebbs and flows, the developments. If you normally listen on the weekend and you're like, where is Cody? We have that show. We did that on Tuesday earlier in the week. Cody's going to be back on Tuesday. If you haven't heard it, go check that out. Hopefully everything we say is relevant and has aged very well in the last 2.5 days of basketball. It's not like playing a couple basketball games swings and changes everything. Of course, maybe it does. I don't know. It's been some wild and crazy developments. Mike, how are you feeling? We finally wrangled you on a podcast during these wonderful playoff times.
I'm feeling good. I think I'm still reeling from that LeBron performance last night, but
oh God, yeah. That felt very epic. And then the Lakers also felt like they ran out of gas at the end. And maybe that's a good place to start, because this is a series that we've talked about in multiple episodes recently. We've done some content on it already. We have Los Angeles getting blown out in game one. They come back in game two. I thought they did a better job in game two of getting into more of their stuff offensively versus just switch hunting. Like in game one, it felt to me a lot like, hey, we know we've got Luka. We know we've got LeBron. We even have Austin Reeves. Wherever I see Rudy Gobert, my eyes are going to get really wide. Wherever I see Mike Conley, my eyes are going to get really wide. Game two was a lot more of these sets that they like to run with, like Luka at the elbow, for instance, and that kind of adjustment. And then, of course, the defensive intensity was off the charts in game two. And you kind of wonder, for a team of that age, can they sustain that? Come into game three, you're on the road, and then of course Luka Doncic with the food poisoning. You've definitely gone through the film in this game. How are you feeling about this series? What are your thoughts that jump out about game three?
Well, there's a lot to unpack, I feel like. But two guys for the Wolves that I feel like have been used in an interesting way are Randall and Gobert. So I think, like you were saying, we know Luka's eyes light up when he gets Rudy in the pick and roll. But through the first few games, he's only given up 0.8 points per chance or something when he's got switched onto him in pick and roll.
This is Gobert?
This is Gobert, yeah. And compared to, I think it was like 1.2 last year's playoffs. And I think you've seen Finch bump his minutes down a little bit compared to his regular season averages. And so I think, like, using those guys selectively, I think Randall's had a much better sort of controlled role compared to his offensive load in previous years too. I think those are two guys that we'll get to. Maybe Jaden McDaniels having the best game of his career later, but that's maybe a good place to start.
Yeah, I've been monitoring it, and I was asking for it, and I have to tip my hat to Chris Finch, because again, last night's game was a great game. I think the score kind of betrays how close the game was throughout, the Wolves pulling away at the end. And I thought it had a lot to do with the Lakers' fatigue, age, the lack of depth, and then Luka with the food poisoning. They went at him all night. Defensively, and I get it. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because what are you going to do with their depth? He's better offensively and created plenty of offense relative to whoever else they could put out there. And so if you go with some, Luka heavily reduced minutes situation because of his illness and his defense, and you're playing LeBron and Reeves heavy minutes to make up for that with like three defensive players, what do you have left? I don't think you had many good options. So they were kind of stuck and ran out of gas at the end. But looking at the minutes, that's the first thing I'm doing now. Gobert, 25 minutes. Conley, 21 minutes. Continuing to stagger them so you don't have two targets out there at once. And then just going with the fact that 28 minutes of Naz Reid, more minutes than Gobert, even though he comes off the bench, is really good for their offense and their spacing. And you don't lose. It feels weird to say because Gobert is such a great defender, but I don't think you lose too much in terms of the team defensive concepts that the Wolves run. And then at the same time, Julius Randle, 41 minutes last night. I thought, again, he played really well, 22 points, 4 assists. When he had Luka in situations or when he needed to play bully ball, he could do that. The playmaking was pretty good. I think one of you guys in the group chat said something like, you want a microdose Randall. You want like the right dosage of Randall. And I feel like they've had that. And then you sprinkle in Edwards and whenever we get to him, Jaden McDaniels, and it's like they've looked very good.
Yeah, I mean, we've had concerns, maybe Nico Harrison as well, about Luka's conditioning, throughout the season. But, even he did play a ton of games, after the trade. So that actually made me feel a little bit better about him going into the playoffs and coming off an injury. He had like less total minutes played for the season than he normally would. But yeah, I mean, RJ pointed out on the broadcast, but like there were so many examples last night of even if the Lakers shell didn't get broken on defense, like Jaden McDaniels could easily attack a closeout on Luka and create good offense out of that. And I think there was a few issues with the Lakers defense, but their shell was pretty, if they could, set up in the half court, like off a make or something, their shell was pretty solid, I thought, on Ant. They still had the stunting in gaps like you saw in game 2, which was better than in game 1, where they were kind of selling out and letting the Wolves shoot a lot of threes. But in last night's game, I felt like even if the Wolves' initial offense didn't generate a high quality shot, like they could just throw it to the second side and McDaniels could easily create something off the bounce. And that's another place where you see the Lakers' thinness, like in terms of rim protection, because same with like Naz Reid or Randall, like if they get a step on their guy, they just see barbecue chicken at the rim. It's really easy for them to be more aggressive in that way because the Lakers don't often play a traditional big.
Yeah, this gets back to, I think, their lack of depth, which is why, I think last time we were talking about this matchup and how the Wolves with all these big athletes and, you see it, I feel like, a lot with McDaniels in particular because he's so tall. You get to the rim at the end of one of these second side plays. You create something on one side. The defense loads up to Anthony Edwards when he has the ball. You mentioned it. Their shell. They still have that contain. They haven't had a breakdown. They stay nice and tight around the elbows and the paint, and they pack the paint. You swing it to the other side, and it hits McDaniels, and he gets a little up fake and gets to the basket. By the time he gets within 8 feet, he feels like he's the Ant-Man. I mean, not Anthony Edwards, like the Marvel character, right? He's like so much longer than whatever they have left at the rim anytime Jackson Hayes isn't in the game. And Jackson Hayes is still only playing about 8 to 10 minutes a game. And, I'm not sure if that's the right call. Like Jackson Hayes doesn't offer much and he's limited, but he at least gives you rim protection. I don't know if they need 16 minutes of Jackson Hayes. It just feels like too small of a thing to really worry about because the Lakers' best lineups are obviously with players like Dorian Finney-Smith out there and Rui and LeBron and Luka, and you have a bunch of these big 6'8" guys, but you don't have much rim protection. And so, yeah, I mean, McDaniels, I was just pulling it up in the background. His lightly contested or uncontested threes for the last 3 seasons, he's taken over 300, and he's just under 37%. Which isn't great, but again, you get in a playoff series like this, and if he's going to make those shots and then also be able to attack occasionally off the bounce and finish in closeouts and finish in transition when they force turnovers, and last night that was a huge theme in the game. That's why you look up and he's averaging like 21 points a game in the series or whatever it is, and it just feels like right now the Wolves have kind of more horses than the Lakers. And the last thing I'll throw back at you, I don't know if you have other thoughts on this series, like X's and O's wise, but the last thing I'll throw at you is the Lakers feel like they're going to win a game with just pure skill at the top level. And we haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen Luka go for 45. LeBron last night was really close, but I think they kind of that play where he was hot and he dropped the ball. Remember that he was gonna take the heat.
Yeah. Heat check part 2.
Yeah. He was gonna take the heat check 3 and he dropped the ball. That kind of completely broke the momentum of that sequence. So I still feel like there's a game that they can win with just their top end skill popping off. But that only gives them 2 wins. They still need to find a way to win 2 more games in the remaining, 3 or 4 games left in the series. So this is really, really good stuff.
Well, I think one of the big underlying themes that we've talked about just internally throughout the season is just youth, depth, and athleticism being such a key for, like, you have this older guard of teams with, let's say Golden State, or even like Denver is a more veteran team. And then you have that push and pull kind of interaction with, the Rockets or OKC or even like Minnesota like this. And I think I felt like, at least down the stretch of that game, there was sort of like a cumulative effect of, fatigue from LeBron and Reeves having to create so much off the dribble, and like the high pickup points from the Wolves guys. It's like, if you're having to dribble up, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker or whoever is, pressuring you for the first, 8 seconds of the possession, it's, and then I actually thought about that too with mismatch hunting, or if they're hunting Gobert, that puts a strain on your legs if you're doing that for 20-30 possessions a game. And I think the Wolves, really worked hard. I think one thing we could talk about is how, LeBron was more aggressive offensively, or how they looked to set him up in certain spots, on the floor. Like, they use their like wide pin down action in the corner for him to try and get Conley on switches. And I think he did a good job at, taking the space and shooting a lot more pull-up jumpers than he normally would, or catch and shoot jumpers, even in the mid-range. But even that, like down the stretch, then you see like the counter chess match where they're not trying to switch Conley in that action. They're doing everything they can to blow it up, and all that just pounding the ball and, hands in the gaps and trying to bully ball. Like, the Wolves, like we talked about in our game 1 member profile, like they have a lot of like mid-size athletic guys to just throw on you at all times.
Right.
It's really difficult over the course of a game to continue to find advantages when they just have so many bodies to throw at you, unlike the Lakers.
How do you feel about the sort of pick and roll chess match where sometimes the Wolves will drop Rudy, sometimes and it's never a deep drop. They bring him up to the level, and then sometimes it's a drop. Sometimes they bring him up to the level. It looks like they're going to switch. They avoid the switch. And then sometimes they switch, but it's not like a soft switch. They play. McDaniels
also close the gap a little bit.
Yeah. So there's this entire thing, and then occasionally you'll see them pre-switch behind the play. Of course, over the years we've done so much content on this, but they're not doing this every time. It's not like the Celtics. They're not like panicking to keep Kristaps Porzingis out. How do you feel about that, like, little game within the game with, it can involve Conley as well in terms of switch hunting, but I've been kind of fascinated by the way they've played it, because I thought last year in the Nuggets series, they had such a great specific approach to how they were going to take out the Nuggets. When they got to the Wolves, not the Wolves, when they got to the Mavs series in the conference finals, I felt like they were just like reeling. It was just like Luka was just picking them apart, and I was like, oh, wait, we don't have another option. But now in this series, I kind of like the fact that they've approached it with different looks, but in addition to like, hey, we don't need to play Rudy 40 minutes, right? We can play these guys less, and then when they're out there, we can throw them different looks. So do you have any, do you have thoughts on this sort of that little micro chess match that's always taking place with him in terms of the switch hunting?
Yeah, I think it's difficult when he has a stomach bug and just isn't moving well either. And he's just like, I actually felt like he still created some pretty high quality shots, like when he ran some pick and roll. But then, I mean, there was a key play down the stretch where this is where the game was kind of getting away from the Lakers already, where I think he got a switch onto Rudy or someone, and sort of dribbled down into the short corner and just got stuck. And that's when LeBron just threw up kind of like a difficult three that clanged off the side of the backboard.
Yeah.
And so some of those possessions, I think the Lakers can get out of their offensive flow, and the ball isn't popping as much at times if Luka's hunting the switch too aggressively. But like you said, it's the Wolves are just very versatile. Like, it's not, there's very few weak links to attack. Even like Conley still had some good sequences where he was pressuring the ball. ESPN had a hilarious graphic they threw up. 2012, 2013, all defense, second team. It's like,
team.
oh, yeah, that was only 12 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be a difficult rest of the series, I think, for the Lakers, just physically. Do they have the stamina to match that throughout?
And the short turnaround as well, right? They play tomorrow. So you had the game Friday night, and then you have the Sunday. I can't remember, it's the evening or late afternoon slot or something like that. But like, we've talked about it all year. Cody and I have hammered from the beginning of the season, fit, top end talent, and depth. And obviously the Lakers have top end talent in this series, but you pointed it out, like in these playoffs, the issue of depth is a real thing when we add the intensity, when we add the physicality. This is the most physical I think the NBA has been in 21 seasons since the 2004 year that caused them to make a bunch of changes. And that's a topic for another time, but I think it plays into the depth and intensity issue that some of these teams have, or the edge that some of these teams have. Let's stay in Los Angeles. I mean, I guess technically we're in Minneapolis, but let's stay in Los Angeles.
Wait, let me throw one stat at you before we move on.
Okay.
Guess how many bench points the Lakers are scoring per 100 possessions versus the Wolves?
Oh, it's got to be low. It's got to be low for the Lakers. Yeah. God, per 100, I would guess like 15 to 20. And now the Wolves like double that? The Wolves are getting plenty of production off the bench. Yeah. What's the stat?
Yeah, Lakers scoring 19 points per 100, which is the lowest among any playoff teams, and the Wolves are at like 40.
Yeah.
And I think that is just. I also think I've thought about this too with the Nuggets Clippers series. When you don't have as big of a marginal advantage with your starters, that those, for the Clippers, Batum and Derek Jones or whoever hitting threes off the bench just like buckles you, because it's not like in the regular season where some of these starting units can just mash other teams.
Right. Yeah. So in the case of Denver, when Jokic is on the court, they've been so good.
Right.
But now you're in a matchup where Jokic on the court is already a battle, and you're like struggling to win the Jokic on the court minutes. Jokic goes to the bench. We know what happens to the Nuggets historically, and especially this season. And especially, it seems like each year since they've won the championship, they're like, can we play with less? What if we had less to play with in the playoffs? Compounded by the fact that the Clippers, have a better bench than them, but they kind of have a decent bench sometimes when you get these big minutes from Batum or small ball Batum or Derek Jones or Ben Simmons, having productive minutes or things like that. So, yeah, I don't. Do you have thoughts on this series? Have you done any deep under the hood scouting? We're part of the podcast. We've always wanted to do this. Is we get to about Friday or Saturday, and we're like, we got to make a ton of content, but there's 18 games we could talk about.
Yeah, it just feels like the Nuggets' margin for error is so much smaller than the Clippers.
Yeah.
You had Kawhi going off in game 2. You've had the Harden Zubats pick and roll being pretty effective throughout the series. But even if I think you'll see this maybe today, or you saw it in game 3 with you get some of the role players going at home. It's just so difficult. Norm Powell had a few big shots in game 3. I think it's really difficult for the Nuggets to there's not one, unlike the Wolves, they're not coverage versatile, guarding pick and roll actions, guarding empty side handoffs or whatever. It's kind of like you create one advantage if you're the Clippers, and the whole thing sort of feels like it unravels for Denver. Have you felt that way too?
Certainly in game 3 I actually turned game 3 off basically at halftime because I just felt like, the bigger reason is I felt like OKC was going to make an historic comeback. So I had to check in on that game. But it again gets back to this idea of having advantages or a larger margin of error when the Clippers, let's just stick with that pick and roll game. When the Clippers have Harden and Zubats and something in the short roll or start to create an advantage there, it feels like they're doing a really good job of continuing that advantage, getting the ball to a shooter or attacking a closeout. And of course, even when the Nuggets defense is operating at its best. And I don't think we've seen that probably in 2 years, but certainly since KCP left. I mean, I think last year we saw it for stretches. So I shouldn't shortchange last year. But even when it's operating at its ideal best around Nikola Jokic, Jokic has great hands. He's got pretty good feet. He's pretty mobile. He's very high IQ type of defender, but never vertical, never like really impacting stuff at the rim. So you're using the speed behind the play to try to keep guys out of the paint, to try to contain the ball, to try to close out to shooters and run shooters off the line. But you get those moments where it's like Zubats is behind on the offensive glass because Harden pulled everyone over, or you swing, and you get the pump fake, and then all of a sudden, like even Nico Batum is like attacking a closeout or something, and you're like, well, this doesn't feel great for Denver. Combined with the fact that I think the Clippers have done a decent job defensively, I think it looks to me like they've had a steady margin to work with since the first game.
Yeah, and to your point about sort of after creating the advantage, maintaining it, I think the Clippers have done a pretty good job at, if Zubac gets it on the roll, he's not, deciding to make a decision too quickly, because they have such a size advantage on the back line. If the tagger for the Nuggets or whatever is Russell Westbrook or someone, he can take a dribble, step through, and just float in that little jump hook, and I think that's been a good sort of off-speed pitch for them as well. Zubac has definitely developed his game a lot, and he has that, he's got to defend Jokic on the other end, but I think his two-way play has been really key for them as well.
Harden's floater as well, I feel like.
Well, that's why you don't want to play drop coverage sometimes, I feel like. It's like, okay, if you're going to play Jokic up at the level, then they have an advantage behind the play, but then if you play drop, like we've seen even with the Bucks after they lost Drew Holiday, although they've been a little bit better recently, like you need to have the guards that can get over screens effectively. And like outside of Christian Brown and maybe Westbrook, I just don't feel good about Murray or Michael Porter Jr. navigating screens in the same way.
Yeah, the numbers on the Harden Zubats pick and roll are something for me to monitor. They've run 60 pick and rolls in the series with a 113 offensive rating. And anytime you're in half court sets and you start to see numbers over 110, you get into that like 110 to 120 range in your bread and butter half court sets. That's really bad for the defense. And so the Nuggets have Nikola Jokic. He can do amazing things. Jamal Murray can still kind of pop off, but the other side, we'll just go back to what we just said about the Lakers. Like, how much fatigue is going on with Denver? There was some report. Did you see this about like everyone has an injury? Murray's not feeling good. Gordon can barely get out of bed. Michael Porter Jr. obviously has like a legitimate shoulder injury that he's playing through. And they're not a deep team. And I feel like with these teams that aren't that deep, when you get one key guy in the system who's like either can't really go or is completely out of the lineup, it throws everything out of whack. It's what we saw with Jimmy Butler and the Warriors the other night. I just felt like they were just drawing dead once he left that game.
Yeah, the Nuggets are on dialysis, unfortunately. But I mean, even with Porter, he has some defensive shortcomings, obviously. He's not always as attentive off the ball or certain low man rotations, but his scoring is just falling off a cliff too. Like he's at like 10 points per 75 on like minus 10 true shooting or something like that in the series.
Do you have thoughts on why that is? I mean, are you seeing...
Well, I think part of it is that, maybe the shoulder is affecting his shooting or affected it in game 3, but he also just can't really dribble. So if the Clippers guys are getting into him and pressuring the ball, and on top of that, I think they've done a good job at, sending timely nail help or gap help on Jokic. They're just not creating as many high quality shots. They did a little bit in the first quarter of game 3, but I thought that was more like Gordon, Jokic, Murray rather than Michael Porter. But I think this is where you see specific limitations of guys in the playoffs, where it's like, yeah, Porter can get free on a lot of other teams, especially off-ball actions if teams aren't blowing it up during the regular season. But once you have to put it on the floor, it's like we talked about years ago how it's not just enough to be a 3-and-D player nowadays. You also have to be able to attack a closeout. And like ball handling is like so important at this stage, like in the modern NBA, I feel like. And yeah, I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know
no.
what adjustments Denver can make there. That's just a specific limitation for him.
Well, this is kind of my takeaway. Even just thinking like, what is the content we're going to make next from a video perspective? What are the big adjustments? What are the X's and O's things that are happening? And I go from series to series to series, and we'll get into the Detroit Knicks. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in Detroit Knicks in terms of chess matches, but some of these series, I mean, these Western series, to a certain degree, it's less about JJ Redick said it in like one of the first timeouts he did the interview in. He's like, it's not scheme stuff. It's less about radical scheme changes or getting really creative with X's and O's, and more about, hey, we've got our guys that can create advantages, and they lack certain amount of weaknesses that you can go after. And so we get in a playoff setting, and it's like you look at the Clippers roster 1 through, let's say, 8 as a magic number, and you compare it to the Nuggets roster 1 through 8, and the lineup combinations and the permutations those teams can put out there. And all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I'm not sure what the Nuggets can do. Like, they should probably try some things differently. I'm not sure what the Lakers can radically do differently. And meanwhile, a team like Minnesota, as we just said, like, I don't think it's uh deep scheme stuff that they're getting into and changing every game. They kind of just are like, here's our advantages. We have a bunch of two-way players, and we can ride with that. And I think we've seen that from the Clippers to some degree, where they've continued what they built all year, and they really built it in the last 2 months of the season once Kawhi started to ramp back up. The crazy thing is Kawhi isn't even like, he's not even out there doing everything, right? He's not out there generating the offense and getting 8 assists when teams load up to him. And he's just sort of aimbotting his isolation shots into the basket as he normally does. He's moving much better defensively, so he's another two-way body. You add that with Chris Dunn and Zubats, and I mean, you tell me, do you think that they are defending or doing anything to defend Jokic that is really making it difficult for him outside of like Zubats just always being someone that defends him well?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're stunting well. They're trying to push him off spots, send timely help when he gets middle or sort of lower touches. I think he's had a few uncharacteristic turnovers or sort of blindsided by the help. Like they'll just send 3 or 4 guys at him in the paint and say like, well, yeah, we'll be okay with the other guys beating us. So I think there's a little bit of that, but like your point, it's sort of more of a fundamental identity thing with some of these teams.
Yep.
It's
Well,
I just think you can't get away with gimmicky adjustments as much nowadays.
in game 2, it felt like they definitely flustered him into some uncharacteristic turnovers down the stretch. In game 3, just sticking with the first half, what do you have? He had 7 assists in the first quarter.
I mean, he was cooking.
Yeah, as a passer, they were trying to throw these doubles at him, and as long as the Nuggets have their spacing down and they can get a cut into that space when they have a 4-on-3 and kind of create a problem that way, I mean, it's Nikola Jokic. He's going to do what he does. But this goes back to your point about the margins being so thin for them that as the game wears on, you're like, all right, even in the Jokic minutes, he has to be brilliant on offense, and then they have to tread water on defense. And then when he goes to the bench for 7 to 14 minutes a game, it already becomes an adventure.
And similar with the dynamic in like the Lakers Wolves series, I feel like Denver, and this is probably you see this more like this is more of an advantage for them at home. But like when the Nuggets offense isn't flowing, it really hurts their defense. I think they're one of those teams where, similar to the Lakers a little bit, where you need to be able to set up in the half court because they have some marginal disadvantages at certain positions. And I thought too, one of the issues I saw with the Lakers last night were, Wolves are able to run off some misses. I think the second chance points were pretty similar, but the Wolves had like 6 more second chance opportunities. So even just getting more, shots on goal kind of. And then a few times like late matching up and stuff like that. And, if Luka or someone off of a step back 3 is late matching up with Julius Randle, they're just going to drive it down your throat,
I want to ask you about the Bucks Pacers in a second, but let's jump to the Knicks Pistons because, as I just teased, that to me has been the series that is the most like chess matchy X's and O's, the sort of the juicy stuff that we think about when we think about playoff adjustments and coaches are getting in their bag and thinking outside the box and things like this, right? So if you look at it from the perspective of when the Pistons are defending the Knicks, one thing they did that we've talked about a ton is they took Tobias Harris, they put Tobias Harris on Karl-Anthony Towns, and teams have had success with this with a big kind of wing who can slide with Cat guarding Cat. Then I think Cat got some buckets, maybe the end of game 2, certainly the beginning of game 3, and it kind of felt like between that and foul trouble with Tobias Harris, all of a sudden JB Bickerstaff like comes out of that. He stops playing that card. I'm not entirely sure why.
Well, he had
because
foul trouble too, right?
Yeah, exactly. He had foul trouble in that game, but it's almost like he doesn't trust another one of their kind of wing size guys to guard Cat. So he comes out of that. And what that does is it completely unravels this sort of complex chess match X's and O's of this playoff series where Jalen Duren then has to go back and guard Cat. That changes the pick and roll coverage when Cat is involved because they had this very specific pick and roll coverage where they didn't want to get Cat popping or rolling. So they would have Harris stick with him. And then Duren is on Josh Hart. And so Duren's like, I don't need to guard Josh Hart. So we get into this like really classic stuff we've seen in the last few years where like a center is ignoring, you get the Andrew Bogut is ignoring Tony Allen kind of thing and roaming around behind the play. And when they went away from that in game 3, it completely unraveled that advantage that they had. And then the Knicks could start to go back to like, oh yeah, we can get Brunson going. We can get Cat going. We can play a little Brunson Cat pick and roll. And it starts to feel like that Knicks offense that was so successful in the regular season comes back to life. And that's just one side of the ball. This series has a ton of these little things going on everywhere all the time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that unlocks the Knicks offense is like Towns being like 15% quicker than opposing centers, where he can just get that little bit of half step on, create a hard closeout or something like that, get downhill, get to the free throw line. So when you take that away and, Hart can only float around in the dunker spot or flash to the middle so much to try and exploit the big man guarding him, it's much harder to generate half court offense,
Absolutely. Yeah. Hart, this is something I always find so interesting about the playoffs. Hart, if you look at some of those either open or lightly contested 3-point shooting numbers, this is the diet of his 3-point shots. He's taken almost 500 of these in the last couple of years, and he shoots them at 34.7%. And that is objectively an okay number, right? 35% on your threes is the equivalent of 53% on your twos or whatever it is. It's okay. But it's near the bottom of the league in terms of percentages for guys that shoot a lot. And he's open all the time for a reason. So his shot diet is these wide open threes, and he takes them sometimes and he passes on them a lot. And when you get in a playoff series, to ask these players to be like, are you Grant Williams? Will you take 17 of these in a row if I leave you wide open? And most teams and most players, the answer is no. Then how do we exploit that? How do we really, really unlock that? And I think that's just been a fascinating dynamic on that end of the court. And for the Pistons to lose that, I'm really interested to see if they go back to that, because I actually think if they don't go back to that, I kind of like the Knicks the rest of the way in the series to out-talent them. Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby just had some like big boy talent moments in the last game or two for New York. And then we go to the other side of the ball, Mike, and we just talked about it with the Timberwolves series with hunting Conley, hunting Gobert. Now you get the JV version of that defensively, where it's like we're hunting Jalen Brunson and we're hunting Karl-Anthony Towns. And so this has just been the Pistons offense. They've had an easy MO for most of this series, and there's a little chess match kind of game going on there with what happens at the screen, like every other possession with one of these players.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if you've seen any of the screening stuff that the Pistons have done, but I think Tim Hardaway Jr. has got a second career as like a left guard.
So
I don't know.
people might not know exactly what you're referring to. Do you want to kind of explain the nuance and the development of what you're describing there?
Well, you're seeing this, I mean, across the league throughout the regular season and into the playoffs with just like it's sort of related to switch hunting, but also just this basically the the refs are not calling as many moving screens, and especially when you're hunting for a switch, it seems like offensive players just have the freedom to just bumper cars, sort of put two hands on the screener defender and just move them like even like 3 to 5 feet away from the play. And it was related to how the Pistons were trying to hunt Towns and Brunson in the pick and roll, because they would bring in an additional guy into the screening action and run this sort of 77 double drag type of action. In order to get the initial switch to then run the pick and roll. And it's just really hard to get around the screens when a guy is just moving you out of the way with two hands on you.
Yeah. So the football part is that like guys are not just moving, but they're moving while pushing or contacting with their arms out. And I feel like guards can get away with it even a little bit more. And Tim Hardaway Jr., because of the matchups, because they're trying to hide Brunson on Tim Hardaway Jr., it's just a wild thing that's developing independent of this series around the league, where we have so many quick rolls and fake screens where guys are sprinting by, that what's happening in this moment when this dynamic Mike's talking about occurs is that the offensive player is basically telling the official, like, oh no, I'm rolling, and this guy is in my, yes, heavy quotes on the rolling. I'm rolling and this guy's in my way. So it's a defensive foul impeding my right to roll and move. And the defensive player is saying, no, this guy's setting a moving football screen, and both of their arms are out. And they're both throwing their hands up like the Spider-Man meme going, well, he's fouling me. That's why my arms are out. And it's like the offensive player has plausible deniability because my arms are out to protect myself from the guy holding me. And the defensive player is going, my arms are out because I'm getting hit in the face as I go around a screen. And it's getting more and more prevalent, and it's getting more and more physical. Who knows how many fights there are going to be for the rest of the weekend after we post this show. But I also think it's relevant because the Knicks might be better off with someone slenderer like Mikal Bridges. The possessions that Mikal Bridges chased Cade Cunningham around, like navigated those screens, I thought ended a little bit better process-wise for the Knicks than OG Anunoby. And to some degree, this is why the Knicks are a more highly touted team. They have these quality players that can do that, even if they're flawed, even if they're not perfect, and maybe offset some of the advantages the Pistons have been able to create with them on both ends, because they've now played seven games, I think, this year, and all the games have been really, really competitive and really close. And I think it's been a very even series. But if going forward from an X's and O's standpoint, if Detroit doesn't go back to that defensive coverage they're playing, I kind of feel like the Knicks now, the ball goes back into their court and they have an advantage.
Yeah, I'm curious also to see the interplay if they decide that Mikal can get over those screens better than OG, because Cade loves to get to that bully ball sort of short mid-range, which maybe he has more of an advantage there over Bridges versus Anunoby. I don't know. I'm also just curious to see if they're able to execute the Brunson show and recover coverage more effectively. Yep. Like if you maybe want to talk on that more.
Yeah, well, this is the whole dynamic going back at least 10 years now, LeBron hunting out Steph Curry of like, can I get a small, weak defensive guard? And then from the defensive team's performance, how the heck do we stop this switch and mismatch from happening? So when it's not Cade, when it's Schroeder, They still kind of want to avoid the mismatch because Schroeder's pretty crafty off the dribble. But I don't know if Schroeder apparently bothers my dog. But when it's anyone else, the Knicks can just switch it. And one of the reasons, of course, you see so much switching in the playoffs is because it nullifies the advantages that you create in these screens, getting downhill, creating 4-on-3s, creating 2-on-1s. But all of a sudden, you're Cade and you're going after Jalen Brunson, and the Knicks don't want that matchup. Now, I will say this. I think sometimes teams get a little too afraid of these matchups. And I understand trying to save the energy for your best offensive player. So you don't want to give that switch up all the time. But even in the last, I can't remember. I don't think it was the last. I think it was the second to last Rockets Warriors series back in 2018. You actually pulled, I think at one point, all the clips for us on James Harden hunting Steph Curry and getting the switch. And your impression is like, oh my God, when James Harden gets isolation on Steph Curry, it's over. But when you actually line up the possessions and you look at the numbers, they're not that bad. And I think in 2018 specifically, in at least 1 or 2 games down the stretch of that series, Curry got a number of stops in that hunting situation. And the one that jumped out to me for the Knicks in the last game was they finally were forced to switch because the screen navigation was so bad late in the shot clock on a possession. And Cade had the matchup he wanted with Brunson. But guess what, man? There's like 5 or 6 seconds left on the shot clock. So if you're New York, not only can you live with that, but I think you can use that as a curveball in lower clock situations where the Pistons are expecting you to defend it one way with this technical hedge, and you got to show and jump out, and then the other guy gets behind the roller, but then you switch back at the last second so you avoid the switch. Just switch it all of a sudden. I think that stands up the offense and makes them freeze. And there's only 6 seconds on the shot clock. Your points per possession numbers will probably be fine. And the reason I mentioned this and the reason you asked me this and teed this up is the Knicks have focusing issues defensively. They have technique issues defensively with some of their defenders. These guys are not all super well-rounded defenders. And it gets exposed in a playoff moment like this where we put a microscope on it and we're like, okay, 20 times in a row, you're going to have to avoid Jalen Brunson getting switched onto Cade Cunningham. And if you pull up the film, I think the Pistons attacked Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns something like 47 times by my count in game 3. If you pull up the film, the first possession in the game, they go right after Jalen Brunson. And I would describe that as a beautifully well-executed show and recover where they avoid the switch. It's like, great. The first play of the game, we knew it was coming. We avoided the switch. You get to the fourth quarter, Mike, and you're doing it for like the 38th time. And you can just ask Knicks fans. It can get really wild and really sloppy. And you're like, how did Jalen Duren get another dunk? How did Jalen Duren get wide open for another dunk? Am I watching? Wait, I literally thought my stream was glitched at one point because I think Duren has 3 straight dunks in the fourth quarter off this exact action. And that's the stress of the playoffs. And that's the stress of playing 40 minutes a game. But it's also exposing these little weaknesses that are there when you go for scheme versatility, when you ask a team to perform like that.
Well, and I think it speaks to that, like the fundamental philosophical identity shift of the Knicks after they lost Hartenstein too, because they really leaned so much harder into the offense, it feels like, and they wanted better spacing with Brunson and whatnot. But this is a series where you could probably use Isaiah Hartenstein. I don't know if they were able to retain him, like based on the cap or whatever. But yeah, it's and this gets back to the point even related to like the moving screens thing, where this is particularly an issue because there's 75 pick and rolls ran a game. So there's so many of these switching interactions happening and so many opportunities for guys to screen that even with like the Lakers Wolves series, like, yeah, the Lakers want to sort of test Anthony Edwards' decision-making continually throughout the game because it's been a little bit shaky in the past. So it's like, if you're going to stunt in the gap, if you're going to have a tight shell, how many times is he going to make the perfect read over and over and over again? And that's what the playoffs are all about, I feel like.
Yeah. If you're Luka Doncic, the answer to that is like 99% of the time.
Or LeBron.
Right. That's one end of the scale, right? And who knows where Ant fits on that scale right now, but it's 40% of the time or whatever.
Or even Cade.
Yeah, and
Where
I
does
think
he fit on the scale? Maybe he's
yep.
60-70% of the time,
Yep.
probably.
Well, I think another part of the matchup specific thing with the Pistons and the Knicks is Cade has done so well this season with bully ball, and he's become so much more comfortable taking stuff from 10 to 15 feet off of those actions. There's even a play, I want to say it was in the first half, where I thought the Knicks did a really nice job with some of the X's and O's hardcore pick and roll dynamic we're talking about. Cade kind of couldn't get an advantage. They recovered to protect the rim, and he kind of like kept his dribble alive beautifully on the way to the rim in the paint, backed up, realized I kind of have some space at 15. I might as well just fire from the elbow and knock down an elbow jumper. I think the Knicks are happy with the way that possession's defended. There's not really a breakdown, but Cade also just loves to live between like 8 and 15 feet and get defenders on his hip and his back and play that way. So yeah, that's a really, really fun series. Let's talk a little bit about Indiana. I mean, we might talk about this for 45 seconds. I don't know.
Or
Indiana
45
and
minutes.
well, Indiana and Milwaukee, to me, I've always felt like the Pacers are just the later round team here, right? Like they're the team that's going to be in the second round. They're the team that you're looking at and saying, what's the playoff setup? What's the advantage? But the Bucks they turned everything around in the third quarter last night. It looks like they were going down 3-0. The Pacers were just continuing to do Pacer-y things. Is this just a Gary Trent like hot 3-point shooting situation, or is there actually something there with the Bucks?
I mean, one thing I know is that I think Brook Lopez is like minus 19 in his minutes when he's on the floor in this series. So
is that good for Milwaukee? Is that
I
their
think
leader?
that's pretty bad, I think. But
oh, you mean minus 19 per 100?
Yeah, per 100.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant minus 19 total. It was like that
No.
might be the Bucks leader.
But yeah, I think that they've used a smaller dose of him in certain stretches in games 2 and 3. I think he was at like 20 minutes in game 1, and then down to 15, then down to 14 in game 3. And I think that probably is, even though he was a defensive player of the year candidate a few years ago, it speaks to the Pacers' pace and space and what they want to do on offense, because Lopez can't switch or isn't as versatile on the perimeter. And I think the Pacers offense feeds off of like getting paint touches, getting ball reversals, driving kick, speed. And that's just something that Lopez is not capable of as much, And so, they in game 2, I think as well, the Bucks had a few better stretches with him off the floor and maybe Giannis on it, when they were able to do more switching and were able to just contain the point of attack better, I would say. I think in game 3 also, their guard defenders had good ball pressure and didn't allow as many blow-bys. I would say AJ Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., they all like really locked down the initial like pick and roll or point of attack defense.
Yeah, that ball pressure point is such a great point, because especially in that third quarter run, they came out. We've seen this. We saw this with the Lakers in game 2. You can get these bursts, especially at home, where your intensity ratchets way up and you catch the offense off guard. So the Pacers had, I believe, their first 2 after timeouts of the quarter, both blown up by guard ball pressure. One was they want to get 2 screens for Tyrese Halliburton to come off of. They get into the action. The ball goes to the big man. He goes to pitch it to Tyrese Halliburton. All of a sudden, Dame Lillard, boom, huge jump switch, flies right out into the passing lane, takes away the pass. Now you completely blow up that action, and now we're low shot clock situation, and it's not even like a good reset. The Pacers do have nice second side actions and things like that, but Halliburton's out at half court. He's in like a dogfight with Lillard, who's jamming him up. Maybe Miles Turner has the ball in the middle of the floor. The spacing's all wonky. So that killed that play. The second after timeout play they ran, I want to say it was Kevin Porter Jr., got up at someone's grill off ball and took away the off ball pass that when the Pacers run the play in the regular season is probably available every time. It's not even the sweet spot of the action. It's just like, we got to move the ball over to the wings so we can get into our stuff. Well, what happens when you don't move the ball over to the wing, Mike? You never get into your stuff. And that possession was blown up. So I think getting that in bursts is doable. The question is, did Milwaukee do anything sustainable to make you think they could win game 4 and then continue to make it a series with 2 of the last 3 potentially in Indiana.
I'd still pick Indy to win the series. I don't feel too moved, but I mean,
Yep.
it was definitely a better stretch than I've seen from the Bucks, though. I would say one surprising thing that jumped out to me was that in the games that he's played, I think the Bucks have a basically identical defensive rating with Lillard on and off the floor. So it's not like he's giving away a ton of value. And then they have like a 125 offensive rating with him on the floor and like a 103 offensive rating with him off it. So it's like you're getting the bump. They're like +9, I think, net overall with him in this series. So I think that, whereas with Lopez, their defensive rating is terrible with him on the floor. So the more they're able to figure out those like lineup interactions with Giannis, with some switching defenders and stuff like that, and then staggering Lopez's minutes and spot minutes here and there, I think that'll give them a better probability of winning. But I still think, like, especially with home court advantage, I think Indiana's probably got this in 6, maybe 7.
Let's have some fun with small samples, because you mentioned the team and the Bucks playing much better with Lillard on. This is wild. In the 2 games he's played, averaging 11 points per 75 on -20% true shooting.
And yet they're better with him on the floor.
Well, obviously, this is the depth thing. This is the depth thing. You have a guy who can make decisions, who's a veteran, who's a spacer, who can hit some shots. Like, that's the depth part. There's a flip side to this hilarious small sample stat fun that we're having right now. Giannis Antetokounmpo in this series, 37 points per 75 possessions, +13% true shooting. The Bucks barely being outscored when he's on the court, outscored by about 2 points per 100 possessions in the 3 games. And I thought a ton of that run in the third quarter came off of Giannis getting deep or Giannis drives. And when Giannis drives, he's getting fouls over and over again, or he's getting stuff at the rim, or there were, I want to say, 3 or 4 instances where he had a deep catch. One of them was on a cool seal. Like, he was off ball under the basket, got the seal. They threw the pass. On the pass, the Pacers double, and then Giannis moves it to the corner, and you start swinging it around, and you got Gary Trent. I think Gary Trent had like 8 shots off all these actions. These are all of Gary Trent's points in the entire playoffs coming from getting Giannis deep into the paint. And that, look, that's the interesting part of this series to me, is that since the beginning of time, it feels like the Pacers, when they play Giannis, he averages like 40 a game, and they just don't really have the right answer. Miles Turner is not quick enough. Pascal Siakam has done a pretty good job, just pound for pound, person to person. But he can't, he can't stop
too, Giannis. A little bit too small, even if he's quick enough.
Yeah. They just don't have a singular answer, and I don't think their defense is really built to necessarily take him away. So it does add an element of intrigue, but I don't know. I'm wondering if that was just one hot quarter, because the Pacers process has looked so good in this series. And let's go back to depth. I mean, Cody's made this point a million times. The Pacers can get such great minutes from their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th player out there. Even Obi Toppin, TJ McConnell, Nembhard's obviously been great. Ben Shepherd defensively. And then you go to the Bucks side, and it's like, man, it's nice to have Dame Lillard back, because we got Giannis and Giannis and who else is out
there?
The
funky bunch.
Yeah,
right.
like guys who you're like, are Torian Prince? He's still Kevin Porter Jr. He's still going.
Wait, you're not a big Kyle Kuzma guy?
Kyle Kuzma.
I just love the Bucks. Like, kill me. Yeah, I know they won last game, but they have like just 3 or 4 like comically bad turnovers per game. It's just like, the Torian Prince, I just call it, he princed himself when he just goes up for a jump shot, comes back down, and doesn't do anything with the ball.
Yeah, my goodness. Kuzma has had a couple of those moments as well. It feels like the Bucks are just full of these players. So,
and to speak on that a little bit more, I think even like Giannis's decision making can be a little shaky here and there. Like, he'll miss some advanced passes in transition. He'll miss a few, elite interior passes that he could make. I don't know. I still favor the Pacers, but I think the Bucks are heading in a better direction than they maybe initially were. I think games 1 and 2, I felt pretty confident in the Pacers still.
To support us, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. It's where we have our member content. We have our stats board. We're going to get the playoff stats board queued up. I'm just looking at a little preview of it over here. Some of these numbers are wild. The 2-game sample size numbers are just hilarious. The Thunder are outscoring the Grizzlies by 43 points per 100 with Alex Caruso on the court in this series. And, someone yesterday it was Jamal Murray has a plus on-off of plus 85 in this series, which is close to the record. I think Draymond Green holds the record for a 7-game series with plus 92 in the near 30 years. It's crazy how long we've had plus minus data. Patreon.com/thinkingbasketball is the best way to support us. Also remember to check out Sports Business Classroom if you're interested in that. Mike, how'd you feel like this went? We finally wrangled you into a hardcore playoff analysis podcast.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll have some more Ben and Mike film time breakdowns on maybe for members during the rest of the playoffs. But man, I'm just excited for the slate of games we have today and tomorrow.
Yeah, we might have to do this again at some point. There's just so many games coming so fast and furious. Again, if you haven't checked out Tuesday's show, that's our normal show with Cody. We got a ton of good stuff in there on some of the other series. And then we'll be back on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, I'm sure we'll be talking a ton about the Rockets and the Warriors. I didn't really have many Rockets Warriors thoughts because they played one game since we recorded. And that one game, Jimmy Butler got hurt like a couple minutes into the game. Brandon Pajemski also left the game because he and Luka went out to dinner and had the same thing. So he had the food poisoning as well. And it was like that was we're right back on our depth thing. Like they just did not have the horses to compete at all with the Rockets. I think I told you guys that game was over with 4 minutes left in the first quarter.
I think if the Warriors had their choice, they'd be sending Jalen Green a DoorDash order from that same place.
We've got a great comment from the audience on Heat. We didn't talk any Heat Cavs. They also did not notice that we did not talk Celtics and Magic. Those two series are on my back. They're just like simmering. They're not. I take it back. They're not even on my back burner. They're warming up in my immersion circulator for some sous vide action, possibly.
Sous vide.
Yes. They're
off the ball. They're
yes, they're in the other room waiting to possibly get going. We'll see if the Magic can make something of it. It's 2-1 as of recording right now, and the Cavs have only played 2 games. I thought what I saw down the stretch of the Game 2 is a little bit more competitive, but we'll see. I think the Cavs and the Celtics, we're going to have so much Cavs and Celtics talk. You'll get sick of it. You'll get tired of all the Celtics Cavs talk we're going to have by the end of the year. All right, that's it for this one. We got to get back to work. Thanks for listening. We will see you on Tuesday. And of course, we hope you are having a great day.